What is government analytics? How are U.S. federal government agencies using analytics to achieve outcomes? And what challenges do agencies face in expanding the use of analytics? I'll explore these questions and so much more with Dr. Jennifer Bachner, Director of the Center for Advanced Governmental Studies at Johns Hopkins University and author of the IBM Center report, Optimizing Analytics for Policymaking and Governance. So, Jen, would you start off telling us about the Evidence-Based Policymaking Act of 2018, what we commonly know as the Evidence Act? What are the key requirements of this law?
Sure. Well, this is a law that was passed by Congress that requires federal agencies to develop statistical evidence to use as part of their policymaking and rulemaking processes. The overarching purpose of the law is to facilitate data-driven decision-making in government, and through that, to improve the policymaking and program evaluation functions of the agencies. There are several key provisions of the Act. The first one that is quite important is that each agency must submit a plan annually to OMB, and this plan should detail how the agency will use evidence for policymaking. The plan might include questions that the agency will answer using statistical evidence, and it might also list data that the agency plans to collect and methods and approaches that they will use to analyze that data. There are also some provisions of the Act that address open data. And in particular, the Act states that agencies must make non-sensitive data available to the public in accessible ways. So the data should be machine readable and it should be shareable. In addition, GSA must publish a catalog of government data such that the public can explore this catalog and use government data in a meaningful way. The Act also creates several new positions at federal agencies. For example, it specifies that certain agencies must all have a chief data officer. And in fact, every agency, I believe, must have a chief data officer. This is a C-suite level position in the government context. And this is a person who oversees everything data related that goes on at an agency, including governance, data quality, analysis, and communication. In addition, there are some agencies that are required to have an evaluation officer, which is someone who leads evidence building efforts across the agency and oversees the evaluation activities going on at the agency. And thirdly, agencies must have a statistical official, which is someone who oversees data quality, ensures that privacy standards are being met, and serves in an advisory capacity, providing guidance on statistical approaches and techniques that can be used for analysis. And then there are a few others. In particular, there are some provisions that address privacy and confidentiality issues.
So one of the ways you conducted or did your research was the creation of the Government Analytics Breakfast Forum. I'm wondering what prompted that creation of the forum and who participated in those events?
This has been a great experience. We partnered with REI Systems in 2014 to create a forum for discussing how government agencies are using analytics. The goal of the forum has been to cultivate a community where participants can learn about what their peers are doing in government, as well as government adjacent organizations like government consulting firms and contract firms. The speakers at our events are typically chief data officers, chief information officers, chief risk officers, or other leaders in the field who describe their organization's approach to using analytics, and they typically present some examples of what has worked well. And sometimes they also describe what has not worked well. The events are free, they're open to the public, and our attendees include both professionals who are working in government analytics, as well as students who are in the Johns Hopkins Data Analytics and Policy program. They're always live streamed so that anyone in the world can participate, and we include the speaker usually presents at the beginning of each event, but we leave a lot of time for discussion so that the group can share their experiences and perspectives with each other. And it's really been fascinating to see the variation across agencies in terms of the approaches that are being used, the tools that are being used, and the types of questions that they're trying to answer. The SEC, for example, has been exploring the use of machine learning methods for fraud detection. The IRS has been using risk assessment techniques to analyze its hardware as well as their software because they're trying to identify areas that are most in need of upgrading. And overall, we've seen that agencies are using text analysis in particular more and more for tasks like analyzing public comments and also analyzing requests for proposals, RFPs, to For a variety of things, but as one example, to ensure that they're Section 508 compliant, meaning that they include provisions that ensure accessibility.
You mentioned from the forum, Jen, in your report, certain ways that government agencies are using analytics to address meaningful public sector challenges. Perhaps you could highlight some of those.
Sure, there are so many great examples of how agencies are using analytics to advance their missions. As one example, we had a speaker who discussed how TSA is using analytics to assess threats, vulnerabilities, and risk. And then they evaluate the extent to which a particular mitigation measure would address each of these three aspects of security. We heard from the Millennium Challenge Corporation, and the speaker from this organization discussed how they are using analytics to determine which countries are best situated to receive aid from the US, and then how that aid impacts development in those countries. So there's both a sort of forecasting component and then an evaluation component. We also learned at the forum that the Library of Congress has used analytics to develop an organizational modernization strategy because they want to best serve the needs of their patrons. So the library obtained data on users' familiarity with different types of technology and their use of various library materials. And the library has used this information to guide its next steps for making improvements. We've also seen that agencies are using analytics to improve their internal processes so that they function better as organizations. For example, the CFPB has collected data on its IT services group, including data from their help desk, because they wanted to determine which issues were arising on a consistent basis. They then developed a plan for addressing these issues more proactively and had the effect of reducing IT call volume, which has saved everybody across the agency time, and it has allowed employees to focus their efforts on other tasks. And we can see that analytics are truly being used by nearly every agency in every policy area, including education, defense, and the Library of Congress, as I mentioned. I truly can't imagine an area where analytics would not be valuable. But I do want to say that I don't mean to suggest that analytics should replace all other approaches to decision making, or that analytic results should not receive the same scrutiny as any other decision input. But I do think that analytics can be extremely valuable and lead to better outcomes.
So, Jen, what is government analytics, and what's the purpose? What purpose does it serve?
Well, government analytics is the use of quantitative methods by public sector organizations, as well as government adjacent organizations, to develop insights and actionable recommendations from data. And the purpose of government analytics is to help public agencies better advance their missions through better decision making. Analytics can help agencies function better as organizations, and they can serve as valuable inputs to the policymaking process. Analytics can help leaders see what's working and what's not in terms of government programs. They can also help identify risks, such as those in the area of defense and health and education. And when an agency has a good handle on risks, it can evaluate the use of potential mitigation measures. So overall, government analytics is the development of exactly the sort of information identified in the Evidence Act as being essential to sound policymaking.
That's terrific. So as a follow-up, you point out in your report that a data strategy that focuses on the end goal has proven to be more effective if it also benefits from backward thinking. I'm wondering if you can explain that insight and perhaps highlight agencies that have followed such a model or approach.
Yes. Well, at the beginning of the data boom, which people say was around the early 2000s, the focus was on collecting data. And this was when hardware could finally handle storing and analyzing large data sets. And as the Internet of Things has developed over the past 2 decades, data collection has become easier and easier, since so many of our devices can now collect and store and transmit data. This includes our phones, tablets, cars, street cameras, watches, and so much more, sometimes even refrigerators. So everyone wanted to collect data, and not a lot of thought was given to whether that data would be useful. Now, however, that data has become so much easier to collect, and as there are so many data collection tools and processes in place, analysts have started thinking more about how they can use the data that is available, and they are spending less time thinking about what new data they can collect and how to collect it. So in government agencies, analysts are now adopting a backward thinking model, meaning they're focusing on the end user of any new data related project rather than focusing primarily on just the data collection piece. So in other words, rather than designing projects around the use of a new data set or a new tool, analysts are thinking about the needs of the end user and thinking through how they can meet those needs. Maybe the agency already has data that can answer a question at hand, and maybe that data just needs to be reformatted or merged with data from another agency. Or maybe a simple econometric analysis is all that's needed to answer a question rather than a sophisticated AI or machine learning approach paired with the collection of millions of additional pieces of data. So analysts are appropriately giving more thought to the substantive questions that need answering and who will use the analytic outputs rather than focusing on collecting more and more data in and of itself. And this has been a guiding principle at many of the agencies that have presented at our Government Analytics Breakfast Forum. Leaders at the CFPB emphasize this. This is, of course, a relatively new agency, and they've been careful to design their analytics unit as one that supports the substantive needs of the agency. When they think about new projects, they are highly focused on ones that are feasible, that are sustainable and valuable in terms of mission alignment. For example, one of the big projects at the organization was to develop a self-service business intelligence platform that allows employees to access data and tools directly. The CFPB is currently working now on a cloud computing strategy so that they can supplement this business intelligence platform with AI and machine learning tools that will also be accessible to employees across the Bureau.
That's great. Jen, what struck me about your report was it dedicated some sections to emerging tools and technologies in government analytics. And I'd like to shift to that topic and ask you, from your research, what are the most promising emerging technologies at the forefront of government analytics? How are things like artificial intelligence and machine learning tools being used? And are there any significant variation in the specific tools and emerging technologies being used in today's government agencies?
In our survey, most respondents viewed AI and machine learning as holding the most promise for the future of government analytics. These tools are not commonly being used on a large scale in most government agencies, but many agencies are experimenting with pilot projects to explore applications for their use. As an example, the Health Resources and Services Administration is using AI and machine learning methods to collect and analyze patient-level data that would help them identify the most vulnerable or folks who are most vulnerable to certain health conditions and who would therefore be most likely to benefit from particular interventions. These tools could track patients using de-anonymized tools such that individuals' privacy is secure. And as I noted earlier, many agencies are using text analysis more and more, which is a type of machine learning, because they're looking to glean insights from public comments, from government solicitations, from company filings and other documents that the government regularly collects from individuals and entities. Agencies are also exploring the use of cloud computing, which is often required for analyses of big data sets using AI and ML methods. There's been an explosion of platforms and tools that are available in this space. So it's going to take some time for government analysts to get a handle on what makes sense for their organization, depending on their needs. And I think that collaborative groups such as the Council of Chief Data Officers and the Council of Chief Evaluation Officers will be particularly helpful for sharing this kind of information. They'll be able to share with each other what is working well and what isn't in terms of using AI and machine learning to improve policymaking.
That's terrific. And I want to talk about, if you could highlight for us, Jen, the 3 pieces of advice from the public sector leaders for those looking to increase investment, which is essential in analytic resources.
Exactly. Well, 56% of respondents to our survey believe that there is too little funding for analytics in government, that this is a big challenge facing the field. So to increase investment, experts suggest that it is first important to demonstrate good stewardship. One of the best arguments that you can make for asking for more resources is to show that you are doing a great job using and managing the resources that you already have. To do this, you can focus on generating small wins rather than focusing too heavily on long-term projects with no short-term visible outcomes. So small and frequent successes are likely to generate more investment. At the same time, it's important for analytics leaders to recognize when a particular project or approach is not working and accept and learn from that failure rather than doubling down on something that's not going well. This is also evidence of wise management. Another way to make an argument for more investment is to conduct a gap analysis. With this type of analysis, you very clearly describe the gap between what's currently being done and what the vision is for the way things could be done. And this requires clearly specifying the tasks that need to be achieved and the human capital and infrastructure needed to accomplish those tasks, in addition to specifying a timeline expected for completion. And finally, analytics leaders should clearly communicate the value add of any new technology they're requesting. This point ties back to the theme that I've emphasized throughout our conversation, which is that analytics should be focused on advancing an organization's mission, and leaders should keep this top of mind whenever they're requesting new resources.
This has been a special edition of the Business of Government Hour, a conversation with Dr. Jennifer Bachner, Director of the Center for Advanced Governmental Studies at Johns Hopkins University, and author of the IBM Center Report, Optimizing Analytics for Policymaking and Governance. You can download this and all Center reports at businessofgovernment.org. Be sure to join us next time for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government leadership and its effectiveness. Until then, subscribe, download, and listen to the entire interview at Podcast One, iTunes, or on your favorite podcast app, and as always at businessofgovernment.org.